For the last 30 years, since 1960, that I've been involved in ministry to the Soviet Union. And as we have been doing research that was difficult because the doors were closed for a realistic exchange of information. Let me just add an insert here, that any kind of information gathering in the Soviet Union up until about a year and a half ago was considered intelligence gathering, and any citizen in the Soviet Union involved was subject to a prison sentence if it was discovered that he was gathering any kind of information for any Western group, including a mission group. You see, the government always told its people, the government of the Soviet Union, that all Christian activities were funded and directed and organized by the CIA and the State Department. And so any kind of information gathering was illegal. Well, how do you do research in view of this? We're talking about non-believers and Christians being afraid to gather information. The government had a carefully, well thought through plan as to how they were going to undermine the church. And this plan affected every area of their life, strategy, thinking, planning. Just very briefly. Young people were not allowed to go to university for the most part, so that they couldn't prepare themselves to be leaders academically in society. Doubts and mistrust was sown between churches and leaders in order to cause friction. And the KGB was involved in spiritual activities in undermining the church. As I've already said, any kind of information gathering was illegal, so that the church itself never knew about other phases of church work or what was happening across the Soviet Union, statistic-wise, activity-wise, and so on. And this meant that we had a very difficult time in trying to strategize and understand what was happening spiritually and ministry-wise in the Soviet Union until very recently. And so we assumed, you see, and also in view of the fact, as I mentioned this morning, that atheism was an integral and planned part of every curriculum, so that every single person alive today in the Soviet Union has been raised on planned courses in atheism. This was not a neutral thing. It was carefully outlined. And so we just assumed then that everyone in the Soviet Union was an atheist if he wasn't a believer. Well, our knowledge of what really was happening behind the scenes actually started only a year ago. We, of course, understood the Christians' perspective. We knew their outlook on life, but the Christians occupy a very, very small part of society. The Soviet Union has approximately 290 million people. And at best, there might be 1 million believers. This is a rough estimate. So we understood the Christians' view toward the world and God. It was the same as ours. But what about the rest of society? It was just a year ago that God enabled us to begin to understand a little of what was taking place. And out of this, to start determining new strategies as to how we can evangelize the Soviet Union. Exactly a year ago, there was a professional conference at the Palmer House in Chicago of all of the Russia studies professors and Russian language teachers in the United States. 2,000 to 3,000 people gathered. This is a yearly meeting. And we didn't know that some 30 specialists from the Soviet Union had flown over for this conference. My wife, Anita, had prepared a paper for one of the seminars. There were a few hundred small seminars during this week-long conference. And after reading her paper on the subject of Christian literature under Gorbachev, it was a seminar with about 25 people. A man stood up in the front row, and he said, "I want to introduce myself. I am Dr. Misha Motskovsky. I'm from the Soviet Union. I work with the Soviet Academy of Sciences, which is the official think tank of the Soviet government, doing research in every area of life in the Soviet Union. and then theoretically presenting proposals to the government for suggestions. And he said, I'm a sociologist, and we as sociologists have just finished some research and have done a survey in the Soviet Union. And in relation to the subject you've been discussing tonight, I just wanted you to know that we have discovered just now that the most asked for book in the Soviet Union among the people is the Bible. Well, when I heard this, of course, my eyes really open and ears open. Here was a man sponsored by the government, not a believer, doing objective research and telling us from his perspective as a professional that the most asked for book is the Bible. Well, to make a long story short, I went up to the man after, and this started an acquaintance. And then I discovered, as he pulled a proposal out of his pocket, he said, we've also been doing more research as sociologists. We've been examining all of the major value systems of the major countries of the world in view of the fact that our value system has collapsed, that being Marxism, which was, of course, a world life view system, not just a political philosophy. And he said, in view of this, we as sociologists, of course, are looking for the good of society, our society. And as we did this research, we determined that the value system we feel that would be best for the Soviet Union is the Ten Commandments. Well, you can imagine what this did to us, a mission agency who was desperately trying to determine what's going on spiritually in the Soviet Union. The Christians don't know. I'm thinking of what's going on behind the scenes and the trends in society. Why? Because there's no way they can know. They can't do research. And suddenly we discover that the government has been doing research, and men who are obviously sympathetic and Russian patriots were coming to conclusions that, of course, are of strategic and enormous importance to all of us. And so this opened the door, and he went on to say, and we're looking for someone here that could work with us so we could do more research to find out what the spiritual needs of the Soviet people are. And he asked if we'd be interested in working with him. Well, of course we were. So we entered an agreement, Slavic Gospel, with this group of scientists to do more research. They interviewed about 1,200 adults, non-believers in the Soviet Union, as to how they relate to the Ten Commandments. And it showed the enormous spiritual interest. Well, then, about a week later, we received a call from the Soviet mission to the United Nations in New York City. And to make a long story short, we went there, our chief editor and I, and two men from International Bible Society, and here, a leading figure in the Soviet Union, a man of renown in the government and a popular writer, had spoken to the United Nations that morning on the problems of young people in the Soviet Union, and he wanted to talk to us. For 3 hours we talked that afternoon. And in a nutshell, this is what he said. He said, our value system has collapsed in the Soviet Union. And if things go on the way they are, our society is heading for catastrophe. That's the word he used. But he said, I've discovered that the Bible apparently has something to say about moral values. And I believe this is what our people need. Now, this man, again, was not a believer. And then he turned to us and he said, the reason I've called you men here is to ask you, could you give me 50 million Bibles so that I can distribute them to the families of Russia? Because this is what we need. Well, this began to open all kinds of doors for us. One thing led to another. As we began to realize this in a nutshell. For 70 years, Marxism had been forced on the people, as I've said, not just as a political system, but as a worldview. But what we didn't know was the degree to which people were not trusting this because the leaders themselves were hypocrites. And Marxism taught the society to lie, to be oppressed, and to murder. 60 million Russian citizens were murdered as a result of the Marxist system. Not outside enemies of the state, but internally. And now what we discovered is that under glasnost, as people are officially allowed to speak out, now for the first time in their lives, they're searching for that which was missing. This past April, we went with a film crew and shot a film. Among other things, I interviewed at random 25 adults on one of the main streets in Moscow. And I asked them, do you feel you need more spirituality in your life? And without exception, these people at random had the same answer. Every one of them. It was heartbreaking. It was touching. It was moving, to say the least. We had to stop at certain times and start preaching because the people were actually asking the eternal questions right there in the street. And many, many others would gather to listen, and they would all nod in agreement and say, yes, this is how we feel. And by the way, we've put together a video we've been using for a television special, and if any of you would be interested, I'd be happy to give you a copy of this on a VHS video cassette. The video cassette is entitled, The USSR, A Nation in Search of a Soul. This past 12 months has just been mind-boggling for us as we've come to realize the dimensions and the depth of spiritual search that is taking place in the Soviet Union today from the top down. Last May, when Mr. Gorbachev was here for the summit with President Bush, before the summit, we received a call from Moscow, and one of his advisors said, could you come to Washington so I could talk with you? And to make a long story short, since we don't have time, we talked with 3 of Mr. Gorbachev's advisors, all of whom had genuine, in-depth spiritual hunger and search. And this is what we talked about. And our Christian books. And how we could get this dimension of life out to the people of the Soviet Union. When we talk about evangelizing the Soviet Union, I have come to realize that God has been preparing this country in a mysterious way. God says, you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. We usually interpret this in terms of believers and the dimension of commitment for which we will search. But from the USSR perspective, from the non-believer's perspective, who knows nothing about God, what we have determined and found out was that the whole Marxist system has so disillusioned the people, the lies, the oppression, the murders, which every citizen in the Soviet Union knows was going on. So many of the families had people murdered at one of the labor camps, and certainly oppressed, and they all were subject to the daily lies in every area and aspect of life. As the hypocritical atmosphere and attitude of the leaders who were not sincere in this idealism of Marxism were directing people into this state of action. And so there was no reality. And now under Glasnost, it's all coming out. It's just boiling over. And as people are speaking out and then searching and reaching out literally. A year ago at the book fair, there was the Christian stand. And you may have heard stories. And we had to put a fence up in front of the Christian book stand because all the books would have disappeared in a few seconds. And the thing lasted a week or several days. And we had taken 10,000 New Testaments, and they would have gone in a matter of minutes. They were doled out. And then after, the hands, you could see them stretching across that fence, thousands. And we told people, well, put your name and address down on a piece of paper. We don't have any more New Testaments. 17,000 people wrote down their name and address wanting a New Testament. These were all basically non-believers, 99%, searching, reaching out, but not knowing for whom they search or what it is they're looking for. All they know, there's something missing in their lives. And as these 25 people said to me boldly, we've been lied to by our government. They told us there was nothing but the material in this world, and now we know there's something else and we don't know quite what it is. Well, I want our 2 friends from Russia to tell us what it is they've experienced. Let me just say in a nutshell as we summarize that to evangelize Russia today, God is of course working through His church. But the church, as we look at the bigger picture, at best can only reach 10% of the population. And so they need the church worldwide to work parallel with them. Not more sermons, but in-depth teaching and assistance in materials such as Christian books. Christian films. The Jesus film of Campus Crusade has been powerful. And then radio, from shortwave and now starting internally, radio and television, theoretically, and in cases, expanding opportunities, is available to buy time on communist radio stations to broadcast Christian programs. And then the training of future Christian leaders, since there are no seminaries, through seminars, theological education by extension. And then the whole area of portable libraries, the whole area of mass evangelism in a variety of ways, one-on-one, and now as Christians are able to go out in society to evangelize. And by the way, we've started a sister church program. I would encourage your church to become involved. At Slavic Gospel, we have information on how you could be involved with a sister church in Russia where you could start having communication and assisting in a number of ways. And we have practical ways where this can be done, and we'd be very happy to talk with you. And then in educational evangelism, as we think of all the factors that affect society, the educational field is probably the greatest, since it touches every young person in the nation. And now, Christian principles and teaching are actually able to be involved in the educational system and curriculum in an increasing way, and we want to get involved in this. And then in just miscellaneous outreach in so many ways, unbelievable ways, and doors are opening on all levels at this time. Russia can be evangelized if we are serious about this, and we don't know how long this window of opportunity will be open. It is shaky at best. Civil war is being talked about openly. The government doesn't know what to do. Gorbachev doesn't know where he's going, where they're going, where anybody's going. It is confusion. And yet, in the midst of it all, the search is deepening. But the people are not being satisfied. This is the greatest hour of opportunity that Russia has ever had to be evangelized with the gospel. I'm going to ask Natasha, пожалуйста, мы мало времени имеем, то быстро я только спрошу вас. Скажите немножко, 1-2 минуты только вообще, возможности сейчас, чтобы преподавать в школе. I've asked Natasha, in contrast now to what I've told you about atheistic teaching, to tell us a little of some new opportunities opening up in the schools. She was teaching Christianity in one of the schools, and I just want her to tell us.
Ну, я веду класс, воскресный класс в церкви в своей. В этом классе занимается у нас 25 детей, и в наш класс ходят не только дети верующие, но и неверующие дети.
For the last 70 years, Sunday schools were outlawed. This was a part of the government strategy. And now in the past year and a half, churches on their own have started to try to attempt to start Sunday schools without materials and methodology. And in their church, she's been teaching a class with about 25 young people, not just from the church, but outside young people are coming into the class.
Однажды одна девочка подошла ко мне и говорит: вы бы не могли прийти в нашу школу и рассказать об Иисусе Христе?
Сколько лет ей было?
13.
One Sunday, a 13-year-old girl who was in my Sunday school class said to me, could you come to my school and tell us about Jesus?
Это было очень удивительно, и я даже немного испугалась, как можно пойти в школу и рассказывать об Иисусе Христе.
This was amazing to me. In fact, I was afraid. How could I go to the school to teach about Jesus in view of what I've just told you, that the government made this an institution for the study of atheism?
Но когда они об этом попросили, то я решила пойти туда, в эту школу.
But I decided, well, let me go and probe and see what's happening here.
Эта школа у нас первая на Украине, там украинская школа, где говорят и учатся на украинском языке.
This was a new school that began. Началось только в этом сентябре, да?
Да.
The school just began this past September. It's in the Ukraine, but you know Russian has been the trade language across the entire Soviet Union, even though there are many other languages spoken. And even in the Ukraine, where the Ukrainian language is really the nationalistic language, Russian was forced on the people. And this was the language of education. But now the government is actually allowing, in the past 6 to 12 months, new institutions to arise. And one of them is this semi-private school that began with the education only in the Ukrainian language.
Это школа, где нет у нас ни пионеров, ни комсомольцев.
And in this private school, no communist youth activities are being taught to the young people.
И я пошла на урок в эту школу.
And so I went to see what was happening.
Когда я пришла на урок и посмотрела, было 30 учеников.
I was invited to come to this class of 30 students at the school.
Они сидели, ждали, и были одни настороженные, одни улыбались, одни просто так смотрели, что это будет происходить.
And so this 30 students, of course, had no idea what I was going to do. They had no background in Christianity, and so there were varying degrees of expectancy.
Но я просила Бога о том, чтобы Он благословил и открыл двери детям, чтобы они могли как-то понять то, о чем я хочу им рассказать.
I prayed that God would give me wisdom to be able to get through to the students.
И когда я начала им рассказывать о Христе, то урок у них должен проходить 45 минут.
I started to tell them about Jesus, and the normal class period is 45 minutes.
Но они стали очень внимательно слушать, и стала такая тишина, и когда прозвенел звонок, окончился урок, то они продолжали дальше слушать.
But they listened with such attentiveness and quietness that when the bell rang at the end of the period, they just stayed. They wanted to stay on.
И урок этот продолжался 1,5 часа.
And so I continued for an hour and a half.
Когда закончился урок, я спросила: дети, если вам это нравится, то вы должны поднять руки, и я смогу, если вы захотите, то я могу еще раз к вам прийти.
Ну, а как учительницы смотрели на все это?
Учительницы очень, они сидели, слушали и, как сказать.
Они, наверное, пригласили вас, нет? Не только студенты?
Да. И
Хорошо.
учителя, да.
And so I asked the teachers and the students, would you like me to come back again? И они сказали, что они сказали?
Они сказали, говорит, они подняли все руки
They,
и сказали.
she said, please raise your hand if you'd like me to come back again. Everybody
Да.
raised their hand.
И у них должен был проходить этот урок один раз в 2 недели. Но они сказали, что вы приходите к нам каждую неделю, рассказывайте.
Какая этот урок, что это включало? Культура или что?
Да, культура, воспитание, так.
Okay. This was supposed to be a class in culture, and it was going to be held every other week, but then they said, well, we'd like instead to make this a weekly class now for you to come.
И на следующее служение к нам пришла еще одна девочка и говорит, чтобы прийти и к ним в их класс, только, это будут дети 10-12 лет, чтобы у них проводить тоже такой урок.
В той же школе?
В той же школе, да.
So the next week, another girl from another class came to me in the same school and said, could you come to our class also? This was 10 to 12-year-olds. The first one was 13-year-olds.
Это было очень удивительно, то, что эти дети, которые, не зная ни о чем, ни о Христе, и родители неверующие, но они слушали Слово Божие даже лучше, чем верующие дети, которые учатся в воскресной школе.
What amazed me was the fact that these children had absolutely no background in Christianity whatsoever, no knowledge, but they listened much more carefully and attentively than our children in the church.
И сейчас с других церквей тоже стали приглашать в школы, в общеобразовательные, тоже проводить такие уроки.
In другие школы, имеете в виду? Или
Да, в другие.
What is happening now is other schools are also inviting people from our church to come in to teach the Christian faith. Хорошо, спасибо. Сергей, пожалуйста, please. Знаешь что, мало времени, расскажи только о библиотеках.
Okay.
I'm telling him that we're running out of time here, we're going to have to cut this down.
У нас один старый пастор говорил так.
One of our old pastors has told us this.
Блажен муж, говорящий краткие речи.
Blessed is the man that makes short speeches.
Ей, говорю вам, он будет позван вторично.
Yea, I tell you, he'll be invited back again.
Я постараюсь так сделать.
I'm going to try to do this.
Может быть, вы видели когда-нибудь по телевизору у вас показывают очередь в московский Макдональдс.
Maybe you've seen on television here the lineup of people who try to get into the only McDonald's hamburger shop in Moscow.
Эта очередь, наверное, длиной более 1 мили.
This line sometimes extends up to a mile.
Но я могу заверить вас, если бы рядом с Макдональдсом поставили сейчас большой грузовик с Библиями, Новыми Заветами, эта очередь перешла бы туда.
But I assure you that if you drove up with a truck of Bibles next to a crowd of people, the same thing would happen for the Bibles.
Потому что у нас очень большая жажда в народе слушать Слово Божье.
Because there
иметь его.
is an enormous interest right now among the people to know about the Bible.
В Советском Союзе почти 290 миллионов людей, из них 200 миллионов людей никогда ничего не слышали об Иисусе Христе.
Of the 290 million people in the Soviet Union, at least 200 million have never heard anything about Jesus.
И мы стараемся с помощью американских братьев, западных братьев как-то помочь нашим людям узнать об Иисусе Христе.
And so we're trying as a church to do something about informing these people about God and the Bible.
У нас не хватит Библии каждому дать, конечно.
We don't have enough Bibles to give the people who want them.
Но в новых условиях мы нашли новые пути для того, чтобы дать людям почитать эти
But in the
Библии.
past months, with new circumstances, we're finding new ways to try to get the Bible to these people.
Сейчас наши церкви имеют некоторые такие наборы литературы. Это Новые Заветы, брошюры, Библии и другие книги духовные.
In our church, between all of us in the church, we have a good supply. Well, a good supply. People have copies of different kinds of Christian books that have come to them over the years.
И мы подумали, как сделать так, чтобы все люди могли, не все, большинство людей могли прочитать.
And so we started asking ourselves, what can we do so that more people could have access to those individual Christian books?
И мы сделали таким образом.
And this is what we came up with.
Мы организовали передвижные библиотеки.
We organized portable mini libraries to go out to the people with these books.
Это обычно делается в воскресенье, среди дня.
This is done Saturdays and Sundays as we go out into marketplaces and surrounding villages.
Мы приезжаем туда, где очень много людей, ставим стол и выкладываем эту литературу.
We say we go to a marketplace and we put up a table and then we just line these books up.
И люди приходят, и вывешиваем большой такой плакат, что это христианская библиотека.
We put up a big sign that says Christian loaning library.
И люди могут прийти и взять книгу на неделю или на две, почитать, а потом принести, вернуть.
The people can come, they can take a book out to read for 1 or 2 weeks and then return it again.
В это время, когда люди приходят и берут, у нас несколько братьев, которые могут объяснять людям ответы на вопросы, которые возникают.
As the people come and look over the books, we have Christian men there that answer the questions that arise immediately as people are glancing through the books.
Когда мы начинали организовывать библиотеки, мы задались вопросом, а что, если нам не вернут эти книги?
When we started this, we asked ourselves the question, well, what happens if they'll never return the books?
Потому что это не государственная библиотека, мы не можем брать паспорт или еще что-нибудь в залог.
This is not a government library. We can't threaten the people.
Но Бог сделал так, что 99% книг, они возвращались.
But God has made it possible through, without going into all the details, 99% of the books are being returned.
Через неделю или через две.
In a week or two. They do have a system that they've put into practice here.
Но мы благодарны Господу за тот 1%, который не вернули эти книги.
But we're also grateful for the 1% that don't return the books.
Это значит, людям они так понравились, что они читают и не могут
It
оторваться.
means these people are so interested that they don't want to return the books.
И вы знаете, дорогие друзья, братья и сестры, мы имеем большую нужду и проблему достичь людей.
We have a big need and a problem as to how to reach the masses of people.
Мы не имеем достаточно литературы.
We do not have enough Christian literature.
Приходят образованные люди, им нужна литература, которая с научной точки зрения говорит об Иисусе Христе.
Educated people come to us. We've got to give them material that will speak to their mind and heart.
Приходят студенты, приходят учащиеся и задают вопросы, ищут литературу, которая помогла бы ответить на вопросы, которые возникают у них.
University students are coming to us asking questions. We've got to have literature available for them.
Кроме того, многие университеты, школы, они просят сейчас, чтобы в их библиотеках была духовная литература.
Not only that, many universities are asking us, please give us Christian books for our libraries.
И мы стоим сейчас перед большой проблемой и нуждой.
We stand before a big problem and a big need.
Мы имеем желание,
We have the desire.
мы имеем свободу и возможность,
We have the freedom and the opportunity,
но мы имеем большой недостаток в этой литературе.
but we don't have the books.
Вы сегодня видели эту книгу, иллюстрированная детская.
This morning I showed you this illustrated New Testament.
Вы знаете, это, наверное, самая читаемая книга сейчас в Советском Союзе.
He's saying now what I told you. He said, I think this is the most wanted book in the Soviet Union today.
Я разговаривал с высокими людьми у нас в стране.
I've talked to officials in my city, educated people, not just Christians.
Это те люди, которые возглавляют провинциальный комитет партии.
These are people who are involved in government, in the Communist Party, because the Communist Party is still the official political system in the Soviet Union. I talked to party members who are ruling the county where I live.
И они просили меня именно об этих книгах.
And they asked me specifically, could I get them these books?
Я говорю им, это очень детская книга, она очень по-детски все объясняет.
I said, this book is primarily for children. It explains things very simply for children and young people.
Но они говорят, как раз это то, что нам нужно.
They said, this is exactly what we need.
Именно это, потому что мы часто не понимаем оригинал Библии.
We don't understand the Bible, but we do understand this version.
Но когда мы читаем Библию и смотрим на это, нам становится все понятно.
When we read this and then go to the Bible, then it becomes clear for us.
И мы, когда в наши библиотеки выезжают, эти книги расходятся в первую очередь.
Whenever we go out with our portable libraries, these are the first books to go.
И сейчас по всему Советскому Союзу, это не только у нас в нашей местности организованы эти библиотеки.
And now, it's just not in our region where we've started these mini libraries, but this is happening in churches all across the Soviet Union. К сожалению, нам нужно окончить. Sorry. Okay, стой здесь. Do you have questions? We have 5 minutes for questions, and then the floor collapses. Yes. It's just beginning now. The opportunities were not there in a mass way. It's just starting in a small way. But still, because of the economic situation, they're asking for dollars to be used also in connection with the printing inside the Soviet Union, even though they use rubles. The ruble, you know, is monopoly money in the world. It's useless to buy anything in the world outside of the Soviet Union. And so any kind of industrial complex is looking for Western currency so they can buy Western equipment. And so the printers are asking for dollars to be used in printing books in the Soviet Union. And of course, the church there doesn't have dollars. Yes?
How active are Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons?
Let me ask him. Что сейчас с ними, с мормоны и сектанты, то есть другие группы вообще?
Сейчас это большая проблема у нас в стране.
This is starting to be a big problem for us.
Потому что мы имеем свободу не только для евангельских верующих христиан, баптистов, для всех.
Because we have freedom now, not just for the evangelicals, but for anybody.
И свидетели Иеговы, они были активны и раньше.
Jehovah's Witnesses were active previously.
Но сейчас они еще больше стали активны.
Now much more so.
Движение мормонов тоже появилось у нас в стране.
The Mormons are starting to come in also.
И мы озабочены этим.
And we're very concerned about this.
И мы молим Господа и просим Его, чтобы мы были первыми христианами, кто могли бы правильно научить людей.
We're praying and asking for wisdom as to how we can correctly teach the people in spiritual matters.
Для этого мы имеем много путей.
We have paths and ideas as to how to do this.
Мы можем это делать через наши контакты.
We can do it through our personal contacts.
Мы можем через радиослужение, через телевизионное служение тоже.
We can do this through radio now and television that's beginning to open up.
Но одним словом, это большая проблема у нас в
But
стране.
it is a big problem in general. Let me just add here, to this point, there isn't a single book in Russian that explains the faith of other sects, Eastern religions, and so on. In Slavic Gospel, we're just completing now a book, an excellent book, and our prayer is that we could print, several 100,000 of these, because the confusion is enormous. The average person there, remember the non-believer, doesn't know the difference between Jesus and Hare Krishna. Now, this is true. All he knows is he's looking for spirituality. And there's all kinds of spirituality coming in. And so, again, we need to get the message out in a mass way. Another question. Yes?
How is the situation with Orthodox leaders? Are they against Christians?
Спрашивали, какое положение у них?
Православные.
Да, вообще.
Раньше было намного тяжелее с этим.
Previously, this was a much more difficult question.
Православная церковь, она занимала привилегированное положение у нас.
Ну, когда имеешь в виду? До революции?
До перестройки.
Хорошо. The Orthodox Church, until about 2 years ago, was sort of looked on as the official Christian expression in the Soviet Union.
Это было удобно для нашего правительства.
This was convenient for the government because they worked through the Orthodox Church.
Потому что они работали через них, и это были формальные христиане.
And the leadership in particular were very formal. It wasn't a vibrant Christianity.
Но сейчас у людей появилась большая тяга к настоящему христианству.
But people now are looking for reality in life.
И многие отвернулись от православной
And
церкви.
so many are turning away from the lack of reality, even in the Orthodox Church.
Они хотят найти живое слово, живую веру в Иисуса Христа.
They want a living faith and a living word. Yes?
Do you know if Gorbachev is open to the gospel?
Well, let me answer that. He's open in the sense that he's allowing this to happen, but nobody knows about his personal commitment. He is the only reason all of this is happening is because he's allowing it. And so he is open in that regard.
I have heard that his mother is a Christian.
His mother is a Russian Orthodox believer, and Mr. Gorbachev was baptized as a baby, and that's all we know as far as the extent of the commitment. One last question.
People looking for these folks to get them into a new economic system, or is it a combination of getting to a new spiritual realm, or is it actually?
It's a little bit of everything. When people are searching and not knowing totally what they're searching for, they're just looking for change, for new dimension, for lack of lies. This time in October when I was there, I was amazed. I actually heard the word being used that people want a clean morality. They actually use that term. In contrast to lying, oppression, and murder, they're looking for something different on a broad spectrum, which would affect economy, politics. It's all intertwined. It's life. And so religion is not reality unless it affects your economics and politics and social activities and everything, your education. They're looking for something to save their society in every area. Спасибо. As you leave tonight, help yourself to the literature. I have these newsletters in the back, and you pray with us. We don't know what to do. The opportunities are so great, we don't know which way to turn. And the thing that is frustrating is the fact that we don't know how long the store is going to stay open. And so we're praying for wisdom. And as we expand, of course, in various areas, we need wisdom, which way to go. We need people to assist us. We're looking for some secretarial help, administrative assistant help right now. We can't expand unless there are visionary people who have the same burden that we would, not to the same degree possibly, but the idea and concept, the fact that God is doing something special in the communist world, and the question we as a church need to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do about it? Are we working with God? Are we aware of what God is doing in this world today? And so you pray with us. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk to you. If you have an interest in participating somehow, if you'd like to see one of these videos, help yourself to the literature. Thank you very much for your concern.